We've got 48 hours until the first round of the 2024 NFL Draft kicks off in Detroit. What are the best and worst case scenarios for John Schneider and the Seahawks on the opening night of draft week? We're going to be diving in our Tuesday episode of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, the host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to all the 12s out there. Whether you're listening in nearby Tacoma, Washington, or down in Dallas, Texas, we greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We are just 2 days away, 2 sleeps away from the 2024 NFL Draft. We're going to take a look at some best and worst case scenarios for John Schneider and company in the first round. And we're going to take a look at some day 3 cornerback prospects that could interest the Seahawks when we get to Saturday's festivities. This jam-packed episode brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Now for your lead story here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. We are closing in on 48 hours until the kickoff of the 2024 NFL Draft. The Seahawks slated to pick 16th overall. Most people are expecting John Schneider is going to be able to work out a deal to trade down and recoup at least one day 2 selection without a second rounder. That is more important this year for the Seahawks. But looking towards this first round, we know, Rob, there are a lot of dominoes can fall without having a top 5 pick like they did last year, where there's going to be a blue chip player most likely there for you at number 5. At 16, you have slimmer pickings, especially in this year's draft class. So let's dive into the best and worst case scenarios for the Seahawks here. And let's start on the bright side, the positives, the best case scenario. And what is one thing that jumps out to you that would be a best case scenario for John Schneider and the Seahawks on Thursday night?
Well, I think the easy one, Corbin, is just that the quarterbacks go. Look, the Seahawks have a Pro Bowler in Geno Smith. They just made a trade for Sam Howell. So if there are 4 or perhaps even 5, maybe even 6 quarterbacks that go ahead of when Seattle is originally slated to select at number 16 overall, obviously that is going to push a lot of the players to play along the line of scrimmage down to Seattle's lap. To me, that is the easy idea as far as the best case scenario to who might be available to John Schneider and the Seahawks, number 16 overall.
Yeah, I would agree with the quarterback situation. And some of our listeners may be like, well, what if somebody like Michael Penix Jr. is there, or J.J. McCarthy free falls, which I don't anticipate happening. But if a quarterback like that is there at 16, could it help Seattle muster up a lot of interest from teams behind them? Absolutely. But I would tend to agree with you that quarterbacks getting picked early would actually open the door for multiple blue chip defenders to fall into Seattle's lap. And the reason I'm emphasizing the word multiple here, if you have Cooper DeJean, you've got Johnny Newton, you've got Byron Murphy II, you've got Terrion Arnold, maybe Quinion Mitchell, Jared Verse, any number of these players. If you've got 4 or 5 of those players that fall to number 16, there are going to be teams that are trying to move up for guys that in a lot of other drafts probably would go in the top 10 to top 12. And you still have an opportunity to move down 4 or 5 spots and probably get one of those players while also recouping a day 2 selection. So in my opinion, that would be the best part about the quarterbacks getting picked early, or even in this case, a lot of tackles getting picked, receivers, pushing those defenders down that would have normally been top 12, top 15 picks. You get a bunch of those guys available, and Seattle could even stick and pick if they had a guy that they just absolutely want, or it opens the door for them to get one of those players even after trading down.
Yeah, no question about it. And so I think that is a realistic scenario, which there are 4, maybe even 5 quarterbacks that come off the board. I mean, everybody is anticipating that Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, whatever order, are going to be early early first round picks. Maybe JJ McCarthy goes ahead of Seattle. Maybe Michael Penix Jr. goes ahead of Seattle. Maybe Bo Nix goes there. Another scenario I think is really intriguing is at the wide receiver position. We are all expecting that you are going to see at least the top 3 wide receivers come off the board. Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors from LSU, Roma Dunze from Washington. I also believe that Brian Thomas Jr. is available to Seattle at number 16 overall, then there is a possibility that some club is going to be aggressive enough to trade up to try to acquire his services. I believe that Brian Thomas Jr. is absolutely a top of the first round caliber player. He's 6'3", 210 pounds, around a 4'3", after leading the country with 17 touchdown receptions a season ago. To me, if you're not going to be the quarterback position, then it might be another skill position possibility that could create a best case scenario for the Seahawks, number 16 overall.
I think the other best case scenario for John Schneider would be if Troy Fautanu or Tali Fuaga both fall to number 16, because you're talking tackles that could be really good guards at the next level. We know Fautanu's relationship with Ryan Grubb and Scott Huff, who have both joined Seattle staff after being at Washington. So I think that would be another scenario that John Schneider would be really excited about if they could those to really bolster their O-line. That might be a situation where trading down is no longer the cards because they didn't think that guy was going to be available to them. But if you can get that kind of a blue chipper to add to your O-line, you're going to take that selection. As far as worst case scenarios, I know that there are a few previous drafts that jump out to you, namely the 2019 draft when Seattle ended up picking LJ Collier at number 29 overall. That maybe provides a cautionary reminder for heading into this draft.
Yeah, sometimes get too cute. You try and trade down and you acquire all these extra selections and you miss out on all the blue chippers. And so the exact scenario that we talked about before, Corbin, where that there may be basically every single defensive player is available to Seattle at number 16. Obviously, that would be very intriguing, especially when you have a new head coach, Mike Macdonald, who is, of course, defensive minded, is going to want to address a defense that finished 31st in the NFL in both rushing yards and rushing touchdowns allowed a year ago. That to me is the biggest scenario that would be a worst case kind of a possibility. And I think an easy way for that to happen would be if there's only 3 quarterbacks, those top 3 quarterbacks that everybody is talking about, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, and then the presumptive number 1 overall pick, Caleb Williams. If they go 1, 2, 3, and then basically there are crickets out there in terms of NFL teams at the quarterback position between picks number 4 and number 15. And the Seahawks are basically looking at things like, should we take a Michael Penix? Should we take a Bo Nix? Should we take a JJ McCarthy? Maybe that's a good scenario for a lot of people, but considering the fact that you have a 2-time Pro Bowler in Geno Smith, you made the trade for Sam Howell, I don't think that that's a good scenario at all.
No, I would tend to agree with you unless there truly is a QB that falls to them that they are enamored by, and maybe that is Michael Penix Jr., but this does not seem like this would be the route the Seahawks would want at all. And the reason that ties into my worst case scenario is that if you have a bunch of quarterbacks go off the board the first few picks, and then suddenly O-line and defensive blue chip players start flying off the board with a few of those top receivers sprinkled in, now you're in a situation where if you don't want to draft a quarterback, yeah, you might be able to fetch more picks because teams that are QB needy will move up, but who are you going to pick when you trade down? And it does create that wash down effect where you might not be getting a Cooper DeJean or a Johnny Newton or a Byron Murphy the second. You might be ending up picking a guy who probably is a second round selection because you're trying then to fill needs and you don't have any more first round grades on the board. So that is the risk when you are playing this trade down game. And if you don't have those O linemen there, you don't have the defensive players that you are wanting, that you have first round grades on, suddenly, yeah, you've recouped picks, but you're not getting that game-changing true first round talent that you maybe could have had if the draft unfolded differently. And it really lowers your flexibility in terms of being able to get the players that you want at that stage of the draft. So there's a lot of moving parts when you pick in the middle of the first round. It's not as bad as the end of the first round, obviously, but a lot can happen in those first 15 picks. And we're excited to see how it ends up playing out. When we come back, yesterday we dished out our final mock drafts. We're going to take a look at 3 fan-submitted final mock drafts and going to be critiquing those selections from our valued listeners. We'll get to that here in a moment on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by Game Time. You shouldn't have to stress yourself out when you buy tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fast, easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. And they've got killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and with their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Recently, I purchased an end of the regular season NHL ticket to see the Colorado Avalanche. They unfortunately lost 7-0, but I still got seats near the front row for under $100 a piece on Game Time. We had a blast, even though the game was ugly. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event, and the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price to write your own memories. If you find tickets in the same section row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. You're listening to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s out there. Thank you, as always, for tuning in and making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Yesterday, we had Sir Nick Lee joining us here on the show, a rare podcast with all three of us on, and we dished out our final mock drafts. And as we do every year, we like to hear from the fans what they think is going to happen. And so, Rob, we're going to be tackling 3 fan-submitted mock drafts. We received over 50 of them in a couple of hours. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to grade all of them, but we picked out 3 different ones that had varying numbers of trades, different style players, maybe some interesting usage of draft picks early. So let's get to them, Rob. Our first one that we're going to be looking at, and this one's from Home Chicks on Twitter, and this one involves a trade down with the Dallas Cowboys to get a first and second round selection. Graham Barton from Duke being the pick at number 24, then Michael Hall Jr., the defensive tackle from Ohio State, in the second round with another pick coming from the Cowboys. Third round, Cedric Gray, linebacker, North Carolina. In the fourth round, McKinley Jackson from Texas A&M, and James Williams, the former safety, likely to play linebacker in the NFL, coming from Miami. And then we've got Kitten Oladapo from Oregon State and Brennan Jackson from Washington State in the sixth round, and Prince Pines bulking the offensive lineup, the guard from Tulane. Rob, looking at this draft, what are a few picks that stand out to you looking at this mock?
Well, I think the first selection here with Graham Barton at the top of the draft, I think that would obviously erase a huge area of concern for an awful lot of Seahawks fans out there. I mean, Graham Barton is a guy that, he has the size, he has the physicality, he has the athletic ability to be able to come in and compete for a starting spot that presumably the left guard position immediately. I do have some reservations about that. I mean, Graham Barton never played a single snap at the guard position throughout his entire college career, was primarily a center early and then a left tackle, and is coming off of an injury. But at the same time, be able to trade down and acquire him makes an awful lot of sense. Michael Hall Jr., the defensive tackle from Ohio State, is a penetrator that makes a great deal of sense as well. Cedric Gray, a linebacker that I actually had projected to go this exact same spot, to me, again, is a very logical selection as a player that isn't quite the physicality that I expect the Seahawks are going to prioritize, but at number 81 overall, again, is logical. The one real pushback I have with this is I just have a hard time believing that Brennan Jackson from Washington State is going to be available in the sixth round. I think that he might be a candidate in the fourth round. But otherwise, I do think that this projection here checks boxes in that what I think, at least, are the Seahawks' biggest areas of concern. They have to get bigger and nastier at the line of scrimmage. As you said, Corbin, Sir Nick Lee, argued that the Seahawks need to get better. They need to get nastier at the line of scrimmage with Graham Barton and Michael Hall Jr. in their first two selections. I think the Seahawks would be doing that. So I think that this is a projection that, while I would quibble with some of the details, I definitely think it makes an awful lot of sense.
Yeah, I think if these picks all happen where they are slated here, that this has a chance to be an A- or an A draft. I love attacking the trenches early. I mean, I would have loved to pick somebody like Graham Barton in my mock draft, but he wasn't available. So ended up going with Cooper DeJean in my mock draft, best player available at that stage. But this is the route that fans want to see the Seahawks attack. I think Oladapo and Brennan Jackson, two Pac-12 standouts. I just have a hard time believing those two guys are going to be there in the 6th round. So I agree with you on that front. But if they do fall and they're there, those are outstanding value picks, guys that could maybe play some snaps for you early on. And so I think that this draft has a lot of really good players. I'm with you. Some of the guys late, I don't know if they're going to be there at that stage, but I really like the hits there in those first 3 rounds, attacking knees while also getting guys that can play right away for the Seahawks. Our next one here coming from Jasicosa_11. And this is what we call the medical mock draft. And the reason that I'm saying that is there's some reports coming out today that Troy Fautanu had a red flag on his pre-draft medical. So maybe he's a player that falls further than people expect. I don't expect he's going to be there at number 25, but with this mock draft, that's what happens. The Seahawks trade down with the Packers and Fautanu is still there. Seattle gets their coveted offensive lineman, and then they get another one the next round in Dominic Pooney. So this would really be attacking the trenches and then some. Peyton Wilson from NC State at number 81, athletic covering linebacker. And in the 4th round, Cameron Kinchins from Miami, Brendan Rice from USC in a trade down with the Chiefs. And then the 5th round, getting that extra 5th round pick in that trade down with the Chiefs, Zach Zinner, the guard from Michigan. And then late on day 3, Jaheim Bell, the tight end from Florida State at 179. Aeneas Smith, the receiver from Texas A&M at 192. And then Dominique Hampton, the safety from Washington at 235. There's a lot of local flair here in this draft, Rob. And again, with the medical reports coming out, sometimes I think this is staged to an extent to try to get players to fall with these reports. But if Fautanu did have a red flag on his medicals, maybe him falling to the back part of the 1st round is a possibility.
Well, it is the possibility if there are a number of NFL teams who agree with those medical concerns. I also read those reports, and I think it's interesting, potentially very alarming. At the same time, I think that the Seahawks, considering their, relationships at the University of Washington, obviously with Ryan Grubb and Scott Huff, they are going to know Troy Fautanu's medical grade better than anybody. And so if they weren't willing to take him at number 16 overall, look, I get the possibility of a trade down scenario that obviously if the Seahawks are able to acquire extra picks and Fautanu is still available to them, makes an awful lot of sense. But I do have some reservations about some of the selections in this particular mock draft. I just think that there's going to be a bunch of players that just aren't going to be available. I mean, going from the bottom down, Dominic Hampton is not going to be available in the 7th round. I do like the idea on paper, theoretically, of Seattle going with a bunch of players that you might be able to get kind of a discount card because of the fact they're coming off of injuries, whether it be a Fautanu, again, the medical concerns, a Peyton Wilson, plenty of medical concerns, a Zach Zinter coming off of a significant injury. I think that sounds great on paper, but that's not how NFL teams typically operate, especially a club like the Seahawks, who have prioritized players who are especially clean in the medical grade. And there's been so many players over the years, Corbin, that I basically had to scratch off the list because I knew that the Seahawks simply would not allow them medically to even be on their board. And there are a few players on that list who I question whether the Seahawks would be the club that actually selects them because of those medical questions.
Yeah, and I'm with you on the Fautanu front. That is one of the few players that I think John Schneider, if he wanted to draft him, he's taking him at 16 if he's there. I don't see a scenario where Well, we didn't think that his medicals warranted pick 16, but we'll do it at pick 25. That is still a massive investment. So from that thought process, I don't know that John Schneider and the Seahawks would handle it that way at all. There's also a few players on here that I think are getting picked much higher than what they should be, namely Brendan Rice from USC. And you know the name, you know who his father is. But quite frankly, he is a late day 3 prospect in my mind in this receiver class. I think there's a number of receivers that should be there in the 4th round that don't have the name, but they have better skill sets and are going to be a better fit for what the Seahawks are looking for. Maybe that's what they end up doing, but I'd be surprised on that front. And I think Kinchins, I know he didn't test well, but we saw this in Nick's mock draft yesterday. I don't think he's lasting till pick 102. I think that he's got too many football skills that teams are going to pick him on day 2, but we can nitpick on all this stuff. There's still a lot of good picks in this draft. I just think there's some issues with value and the Fotanu thing. Who knows what those medicals mean, but I would give this one a B- just because I do wonder about that first selection. If they aren't picking him at 16 and he's still there at 25, I wonder if they would pick him there because of the medical reports that are out there. And our last one, this is the one we always pick every year. We get a mock draft that's got at least 3 trades, and this is kind of like the 2018 John Schneider mock draft or draft for the Seahawks. And this one coming from Chase Rydell, 41, 3 trades, one with the Lions getting picked 29, 61, and 73, getting a haul to move back to 29. And then they are able to make trades with the Bengals and Texans. So you end up having 11 picks in this draft, starting with Johnny Newton, another player. There's been some medical stuff that's come out because of the injury that he had, the foot fracture that he had, having a high rate of recurrence. So there's some teams maybe that have him off their first round board. Who knows if the Seahawks are on that front, but you're able to get Newton. You get Dominic Pooney at pick 61, another draft with Cedric for 8. And then you've got Javon Bullard from Georgia at pick 86, which that comes from another trade down here, working with those extra picks the Seahawks added. And then Jared Wiley and Mason McCormick, as well as Javon Solomon coming in the 4th round. Kenny Logan, Isaac Guerrero from Louisville, Sam Hartman, and Akeem Dankwa from Howard. I'm not going to lie, Rob, this feels very John Schneider-esque because this is the kind of stuff he's done in the past. And a lot of these players, this is actually a draft where I feel like the sweet spot on most of these players was hit.
I would agree. I think that there is a lot of really cool possibilities here. Again, I have a hard time believing that Jazon Newton or Johnny Newton is going to be available at number 29 overall. Look, I don't have the access to the medical reports that the NFL clubs do. I've been befuddled, frankly, by the idea that Jazon Newton is not a top 20 selection. I think that he would be among the best players available to Seattle at number 16 overall. So very similar to the conversation we just had before with Troy Fautanu. If you are not going to take him at number 16 overall, I just don't know that you're going to take him at number 29. But he's a terrific football player. Dominic Pooney in the second round, is a terrific football player. So certainly Cedric Gray, Javon Bullard, I believe a selection that you projected for the Seahawks. I love the agility and the ball skills. The pure, to me, he is the best free safety, pure coverage safety of this draft class. So there are a lot of things about this draft that I really like, not the least of which is the fact that Seattle had 7 selections and then turned that into 11. For a club that has an awful lot of holes, I think that this mock draft makes an awful lot of sense. I just, again, have some reservations about whether some of the key players in this particular mock draft are actually available where this projection lines them up for the Seahawks.
I'm going to give this one an A- just because the sense I really liked the process. And if the Seahawks are going to trade down that far in the first round, there is a good chance that they can get 2 day 2 selections from one of those teams in the very bottom of the first round. And then that gives you more ammo that you can try to move around in other trades. And that is what Chase Rydell did in this draft. Now, is Newton or a player like that going to be there at 29? That would be the gamble that you are making. That's the roll of the dice you're making, that you're going to still have a guy of that caliber there. You don't want to end up in a situation where, we got all these picks, but now we need to pick an LJ Collier at pick 29 again. So that is the risk that you play there by moving down 13 spots. But if you still got a player of that caliber there, then that is a home run, because now you got a couple extra picks on day 2. You can either pick there, or you can do some more trade downs as Chase did it and really stockpile on players on day 2. So that was my favorite of these 3. But again, there's so many moving parts in all these. Who knows how things are going to play out when we get to the draft starting on Thursday night. Up next, we have reached the very end of our NFL draft position by position preview. The Seahawks have a lot of corners on their roster. It's probably not the biggest need that they have, but we're going to look at some day 3 corner prospects that could intrigue the Seahawks. And we'll get to that here in a moment on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is sponsored by our friends at BetterHelp. What's the first thing you do if you had an extra hour in your day? For me, I wish I had a bit more time to squeeze in weightlifting and jogging to get in the best shape of my life. The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it. And BetterHelp Online Therapy will assess your needs and can match you with your own licensed professional therapist in less than 48 hours. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Learn to make more time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's 10% off your first month of online therapy at betterhelp.com/lockedon. This episode is also brought your way by FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every single game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. You can bet on everything from Connor McDavid slap shots to Vlad Guerrero Jr. home runs to LeBron James slam dunks. It's all on an app that's safe, secure, and easy to use. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. You're listening to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks, the penultimate episode before the 2024 NFL Draft. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to all the 12s out there. Thank you for tuning in and making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. The Locked On NFL Mock Draft is available now. Find the ultimate 6-episode series on Locked On NFL Draft to hear who the local Locked On experts are picking for every NFL franchise, with live reactions from local college football experts and even the fantasy football angle. The Locked On NFL Mock Draft available now on Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. We have really reached the conclusion of a very long haul here, going through prospects at every single position group. And we're going to cap things off today, Rob, with the cornerback group. And obviously, this has been an area the Seahawks have already made a lot of investments. They drafted Devin Witherspoon 5th overall a year ago. The year before that, in the 5th round, they found an absolute gem in Reek Woolen, both those players being finalists for Defensive Rookie of the Year in their first seasons with Seattle. They've got Mike Jackson and Trey Brown coming back. Artie Burns re-signed. Kobe Bryant's back. This is a very deep, talented cornerback group, and yet they've only got 2 of these players under contract past this upcoming season. And so day 3 might be that sweet spot where the Seahawks are looking to add a young developmental corner to this roster.
Yeah, it absolutely could be. And so that's why I tried to take the approach here of going with bigger players as well as smaller, quicker players that might be able to make an immediate impact on special teams. I'm going to start with Dwight McLevin, the junior. He's a corner from Arkansas, 6'2", 185-pounder. Originally signed with LSU as a 4-star recruit, and of course had to work his way up into playing time at LSU. We know that the Tigers traditionally have had some of the best secondary play of any in all of college football. He winds up eventually transferring to Arkansas, and that to me is where he really excelled. He had 7 interceptions among 16 pass breakups breakups over the past 2 seasons. Again, 6'2", 185 pounds. He's a little bit slight, but he does not lack for physicality. He had 3 forced fumbles over the last couple of seasons. I do have some reservations about his physicality overall in terms of run support, but I think that is something that you can work to develop because, as we just talked about, the Seahawks have a great deal of depth at the cornerback position. And if Dwight McGlothern Jr. is available in the 4th, 5th round, I really think that he would be among the best cornerbacks at that spot.
I want to stay in the Pacific Northwest with the first player that I want to discuss here on day 3 cornerbacks. And it's a player that, quite frankly, I would not have as a day 3 player. I think he's a 3rd round talent. Kyrie Jackson from Oregon, another tall, long, really athletic corner. Ran 4.5 in the 40, so he's not Reek Woolen from that perspective, but still a very good athlete who's got some physicality and a little bit of attitude to his game. I've got a top 90 grade on him, but most people are looking at him as a day 3 player, and this is a deep quarterback class. So it is possible he could fall into the 4th round. Seattle's got 2 picks there, and not just because he's been playing nearby in Oregon, but Ryan Grubb is going to know this guy really well because he had to scout for him in those matchups against Oregon. And this is a guy that had to deal with Rome Odunze and Washington Studs receivers, and he gave up some big plays, but there were also some really good plays on film in those games as well. So this is a guy that has played top competition. He has plus athleticism. He's got the length and the size you're looking for. And I still feel like he is growing as a player. Didn't have a ton of snaps early in his college career before transferring to Oregon. So this is a guy that I feel like is still a developmental player, and yet maybe in the next couple of years could be a guy that could play some snaps for the Seahawks. We don't know what's going to happen with Mike Jackson and some of these other players in Seattle's roster. And Reek Woolen's got to show that he can get back to his rookie form. If not, Seattle might be looking to see, hey, who can we put with Devin Witherspoon in the future? And you already would have that potential guy in the roster with Kyrie Jackson, who also can play some special teams. So he's a guy that I'm very high on, not just because of the Pacific Northwest ties, but he just seems like a player that would fit Mike McDonald's scheme, and he would have certainly intrigued Pete Carroll back in the day as well.
Yeah, he absolutely would have. I mean, Kyrie Jackson, I agree with you. I mean, he's a player that I personally view as a day 2 guy. I'd be surprised if he is available. I know a lot of people think that is a possibility for him. So to me, it goes without saying. Kyrie Jackson from Oregon, Chris Abrams-Drain from Missouri are 2 guys that would make an awful lot of sense. I personally view as day 2 guys. If they're available for day 3, they would be absolutely at the top of my list here. I'm just going to assume those players are off the board. As I mentioned before, Dwight McGlothern from Arkansas is a player I'm really intrigued by. I'm going to go with the player that is very much off the radar for a lot of people. That's Quantez Stiggers. Quantez Stiggers was a guy that played his last season actually in a Canadian Football League, the Toronto Argonauts to be specific. He's a 6 foot, 204 pounder who, after playing at a relatively low level high school program, basically just kind of slipped through the cracks in the recruiting process. And then tragically, his father passed away after that. He had signed with a small school college, Lane College. And so he didn't play there, just kind of stayed home and tried to be supportive of his family. Then wound up playing the semi-pro league, got an opportunity in the Canadian Football League, and he was dominant this past season. He was easily the rookie of the year. He was an all-star. He was a guy that had 5 interceptions this past season, had 53 tackles in his one season in the Canadian Football League. And because he did not play a single snap of college football, then he is technically eligible for the 2024 NFL draft. The Seahawks have already shown some interest in him, bringing him in for a visit. He's 6 foot, 204 pounds, running the 4.4s, has shown physicality, has shown ball skills. I'm really intrigued by this guy. I think that he has a chance to actually go on day 2. And so, again, if he is one of those players that is available to Seattle with their 2 4th-round selections, and certainly when you start talking about the 6th round, I think that Quantez Stiggers is a player the Seahawks fans should be familiar with, because the Seahawks scouts definitely are.
I'm going to be looking at 2 players from totally different programs here. Cam Hart playing for one of the Blue Bloods, which is Notre Dame, 6'2", almost 210 pounds. This is a big, thick cornerback. My biggest concern with him, the reason I think he's fallen middle of day 3, didn't have an interception either of the last 2 years, only 2 picks his entire career. Are there some pass breakups? Absolutely. But he was more of a run-stopping cornerback than he was a ball hawk. And so that is an area that would concern me a little bit. But I love the physicality. We know how important that is at the cornerback position. And he might also be a guy that you could transition to safety because of his size and his tackling ability. So he's a player that I've got a 5th-round grade on and that I think may make some sense for the Seahawks from a depth standpoint, also can play special teams. And on the other side of the coin, going to the FCS level, South Dakota, the Coyotes, Miles Harden, 6 foot 200, another fairly stocky corner, but he's got ball skills. And the other thing I like about this guy, there are some shades of Peanut Tillman on this kid's film. He had 4 forced fumbles 2 years ago for the Coyotes. So this guy is a physical tackler that likes to rip the football away. He's got more ball skills, at least at the FCS level, than what we saw from Cam Hart. And he's a guy that I could see in that late 4th all the way to the early 6th range in the middle of day 3 that could make some sense for the Seahawks, that also could have some safety value at the next level as well. So both those players are very much on my radar as mid-day 3 candidates that could fit Mike McDonald's scheme.
Yeah, and I love that you kind of highlight the positional versatility of those players. That, to me, is one of the most intriguing things about Daquan Hardy, a 5'9", 179-pound cornerback from Penn State, who actually only started 5 games out of 48 at the college level. At the same time, he might just be the best punt returner in this draft class. And so I've talked about this at the wide receiver position, and previously projecting Oregon State's Anthony Gould, as well as Jazon Jackson from Tulane as possibly being Seahawk draft pick. Same kind of thing with Daquan Hardy. I mean, he had 2 punt returns for a touchdown this past season for Penn State that tied him for the national lead in terms of punt returns. And he's a ball hawk. I mean, this is a guy that, as I mentioned, only started 5 games for Penn State this past over his college career, but he has a track record of playing his best when the lights shine brightest. Almost all of those interceptions came this past season for Penn State while primarily playing the nickel cornerback. And if you want to go all the way back to his high school career, Corbin, this is a guy that he not only led his high school team to a state championship, he was dynamite in that state championship game. He has 4 touchdowns, 1 off of an interception return, 1 off of 100-yard, I believe it was a 100-yard kickoff return. That might have been an interception. The other one was an 80-yard return. 1 for 80 yards, 1 for 100 yards, and then again, 2 more scores as a receiver. That is the type of dynamic athlete that you are looking for on day 3. So again, 5'9", 179 pounds. Is he going to be able to crack Seattle's lineup as a cornerback? Probably not. But in day 3, if you are looking for a guy who can come in and play immediately as a return man, Daquan Hardy is somebody that Seahawks are going to be keeping close tabs on as well.
As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. When we return tomorrow, we are going to take a deep dive into some predictions, what we anticipate to see from the draft as a whole heading into Thursday night's first round. And we are going to dish out our selections for all 32 picks, how things are going to play out on Thursday night live. It's going to be a really fun show. Make sure that you are listening in. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Go Hawks.